Namaste and welcome back, dear listeners. Ready for another deep dive?
Absolutely.
We're going to be taking a look at an editorial from the October 2024 edition of PreSense eMagazine.
Looking forward to it.
And this editorial was written by the managing editor, Prime Point Srinivasan.
Yes.
Now, this editorial focuses on some surprising results and key lessons from the recent assembly elections.
Yeah.
In Haryana and Jammu and Kashmir. And I have to say that, on the surface, we all kind of feel like we know what happened in those elections. But Prime Point Srinivasan really digs deep and kind of unearths some things about the strategies that were used and kind of the voter trends that could really shape the future of Indian politics.
Yeah, I think so too. I think Prime Point Srinivasan has a knack for spotting these trends and sort of connecting the dots in a way that really makes you think,
Absolutely.
about the bigger picture and how these seemingly isolated events can actually have a ripple effect across the entire political landscape.
Absolutely. So let's jump right in.
Okay.
Prime Point Srinivasan kicks things off with Haryana. Now, in Haryana, you might recall that the early polls were predicting a Congress victory.
Right.
The feeling was that they were going to ride this wave of anti-incumbency sentiment against the BJP.
Right. It seemed like a pretty safe bet at the time.
Yeah.
A lot of analysts were predicting a Congress win.
Yeah, it seemed like a sure thing. And yet, that's not what happened at all.
No.
The BJP ended up winning.
They did?
They secured a third consecutive term, winning 48 out of 90 seats.
That's a pretty decisive victory.
It is.
When you think about it, it's quite remarkable.
So how do they pull this off?
Well, this is where Srinivasan's analysis gets really interesting. He argues that the BJP's victory was a result of a carefully crafted strategy. They really understood the evolving voter dynamics in Haryana.
So what were some of the key elements of this strategy that Srinivasan highlights in his editorial?
Well, one of the things he points out is that the BJP very cleverly expanded their appeal beyond their traditional support base. They didn't just focus on their usual vote banks.
Right.
They actively reached out to non-Jat communities,
Right.
particularly the OBCs.
They're backward classes.
Yes, and the scheduled castes.
Right.
And these are significant voter groups that the Congress kind of overlooked,
Right.
They relied a bit too heavily on their traditional Jat vote bank.
Yeah. It's almost like they took it for granted.
Yeah, they kind of assumed that those votes were in their pocket and didn't really put in the effort to connect with these other communities.
Right. And Srinivasan is saying that was a strategic mistake.
A big one.
Right.
The BJP, on the other hand, saw an opportunity. They recognized the growing influence of these communities, and they made a concerted effort to reach out to them, address their concerns, and really incorporate their aspirations into their campaign narrative.
And that's interesting because it really speaks to this broader trend that we're seeing in Indian politics, right?
Yeah.
Where parties are realizing that they can't just rely on these fixed vote banks anymore.
Exactly.
They have to constantly adapt and engage with different communities and their evolving aspirations.
It's about building bridges, not walls.
Right.
It's about recognizing that India is a diverse country and that to succeed politically, you need to represent that diversity in your policies, in your messaging, and in your outreach.
Absolutely. And Point Srinivasan actually brings up a very specific example of how the BJP kind of put this strategy into action. He highlights this really interesting decision by the BJP to replace their incumbent chief minister, who was a Jat leader, with Manohar Lal Khattar, who is an OBC leader.
Right.
Now, why was that such a significant move in Srinivasan's view?
Well, he argues that by replacing the Jat leader with an OBC leader, the BJP achieved two things simultaneously. Firstly, they managed to kind of deflect some of that anti-incumbency sentiment that was building up, by bringing in a fresh face.
Right.
They signaled to the voters that they were willing to change to listen to their concerns and to address those concerns. And secondly, and perhaps even more importantly, by choosing an OBC leader, they sent a very clear message to those non-Jat communities that they were being heard and that their aspirations were being taken seriously.
And it was a symbolic gesture.
It was.
But it had very real political implications.
It did.
Right.
It showed that the BJP was not just paying lip service to the idea of inclusivity, they were actually putting it into practice.
It's like they were saying, we're not just talking the talk, we're walking the walk.
Exactly.
And that resonated with the voters.
It did.
Prime Point Srinivasan also points out that the Congress missed a golden opportunity by sidelining some of their own prominent leaders from other communities like Kumari Selja, who was a prominent Dalit leader.
Right.
And Srinivasan argues that this was a mistake.
He does.
Because it gave the impression that the Congress was still too focused on their traditional power structures.
Yeah.
And not really willing to embrace the changing demographics of the electorate.
And it played right into the BJP's hands.
Right.
The BJP was able to capitalize on this perceived lack of inclusivity within the Congress and portray themselves as the party that was truly representative of all communities.
So it's almost like the Congress was playing it safe.
They were.
Sticking to their old playbook while the BJP was reading the game differently.
They were adapting to the changing realities on the ground.
Right.
And they were willing to take risks.
And that's what ultimately led to their victory.
That's what Srinivasan argues in PreSense magazine.
Right.
He says that the BJP's victory in Haryana was not just a fluke. It was a result of a carefully planned and executed strategy that took into account the changing demographics of the state and the evolving aspirations of its voters.
So it's a case of adapting to the evolving political landscape. You can't just rely on your traditional strongholds.
Yep.
You have to constantly assess and engage with different communities and their aspirations. Right.
That's the key takeaway here.
All right, now let's move on to Jammu and Kashmir.
Okay.
These elections were particularly significant.
They were.
Because they were the first ones held after the abrogation of Article 370.
A historic moment.
Yes. And Prime Point Srinivasan and his PreSense editorial really digs into the complexities of this new political landscape.
Absolutely a lot to unpack there.
Yeah. So let's start with a little bit of context for our listeners who might not be familiar with all the details.
Okay.
Article 370 was a special provision in the Indian Constitution.
Right.
That granted Jammu and Kashmir a certain degree of autonomy.
A unique status.
Yes, but in 2019, the government revoked it.
A bold move.
And that obviously had huge political implications.
It did. It reshaped the entire political landscape of the region.
Right, so how do these implications play out in the election results?
Well, the National Conference, or NC, as it's popularly known, joined forces with the Congress, and they secured a total of 48 seats.
Okay.
With the NC winning 42 seats on its own.
That's a pretty strong showing.
It is. It shows they still have a lot of support on the ground, especially in the Kashmir Valley.
Right.
The BJP, on the other hand, while dominant in Jammu with 29 seats, faced a really tough battle in the Kashmir Valley.
They did.
And according to Srinivasan's analysis, this was largely due to the heightened sense of regional identity and the post-Article 370 political climate in Kashmir.
Okay, so essentially what he's saying is that the BJP's national narrative struggled to resonate.
It did.
In a region that was grappling with questions of identity and autonomy.
Exactly. It's a reminder that you can't win hearts and minds with a one-size-fits-all approach.
Right. You have to understand the specific context of each region.
Absolutely. And the sensitivities.
And the sensitivity.
And the aspirations of the people who live there.
Right.
And that's something the BJP perhaps didn't fully grasp in this instance.
Interesting.
Yeah.
All right, well, we're going to take a quick break.
Okay.
And when we come back, we'll delve deeper into Srinivasan's analysis of Jammu and Kashmir.
Sounds good.
And we'll explore the key lessons he draws from both these elections.
Looking forward to it. And this is where it gets even more fascinating. Srinivasan points out that while the BJP struggled to connect in Kashmir, regional parties like the National Conference were able to tap into those very sentiments of regional identity and position themselves as defenders of Kashmiri interests.
Right. So the BJP's national appeal, which worked so well in Haryana, wasn't as effective in a region like Kashmir, which has such a distinct political and cultural landscape.
You hit the nail on the head there. It's about understanding the nuances, the specific context, and the historical baggage that each region carries.
It's almost like speaking different languages.
It is.
You know?
What works in one place might not work in another.
Right.
And you know, Prime Point Srinivasan also highlights the, pretty poor performance of the Congress Party and the decline of the People's Democratic Party, the PDP. Remember, they were a dominant force in Kashmir.
Yeah.
But this time around, they pretty much collapsed.
Yeah.
And this reflects a sense of disillusionment, I think, among some voters. Yeah. Particularly in the wake of the abrogation of Article 370.
So it's like different dynamics are at play.
Absolutely.
In different regions.
Yeah.
And political parties really need to be aware of these nuances.
They do.
If they want to be successful.
Otherwise, they're shooting in the dark.
Right. And this is something that Prime Point Srinivasan really emphasizes in his editorial.
He does.
He goes beyond just analyzing what happened.
Right.
And he actually extracts some key lessons.
He does.
For political parties.
It's like a political playbook.
Yeah.
He lays out 3 key takeaways.
Okay, let's hear them.
And the first one he says is the importance of building a broad voter base.
Okay.
Don't just rely on your traditional support base.
Right.
You have to constantly expand your appeal.
Right.
Reach out to new communities.
Yeah.
Understand their aspirations.
Yeah.
And incorporate those aspirations into your political platform.
And he uses the BJP's success in Haryana.
He does.
As a perfect example of that.
Exactly.
They didn't just stick with their usual vote banks.
No, they didn't.
They actively reached out.
Yeah.
To non-JAT communities like the OBCs and the scheduled castes, and it paid off big time.
It did. Yeah. And this is where I think Srinivasan is drawing a very interesting parallel with what he sees as a potential misstep by the BJP. In the 2024 general elections, he suggests that they might have gotten a bit complacent, predicting a massive win, and that allowed the opposition to gain some ground.
So it's a reminder that even when you're on a winning streak,
it is.
You can't afford to
rest on your laurel.
Take your voters for granted.
Take your voters for granted, exactly. You always have to be in touch with the people.
Right.
Understand their changing aspirations.
Yeah.
And constantly evolve your strategies.
Right.
To meet those aspirations.
Like no matter how big you are.
Yeah.
You can't rest on your laurels.
Absolutely.
You always have to be
on your toes.
In touch with the people.
In touch with the people.
Okay, so that's the first lesson.
That's the first lesson.
Prime Point Srinivasan's second lesson.
Yeah.
Focuses on
internal unity.
Internal unity within a party.
Within a party.
Yes.
He observes that the Congress's internal divisions, both in Haryana and Jammu and Kashmir, seriously weakened their campaigns.
It's like they were fighting battles on 2 fronts.
They were.
One against the opponent.
Yes.
And one within their own ranks.
Within their own ranks. Yeah. And that's never a good recipe.
And Srinivasan's point is very clear.
It is.
A house divided against itself cannot stand.
A classic quote.
This is true in any sphere of life.
It is.
But especially in politics.
You need a united front to project a clear vision to the voters and to mobilize support effectively.
Right.
And that's a lesson that all political parties, regardless of their ideology, should really take to heart.
All right, so internal unity is crucial.
It is.
And Srinivasan's third lesson zeroes in on the importance of strong local leadership.
Yes.
And a deep understanding of regional issues.
Regional issues.
And he uses the BJP's struggles in the Kashmir Valley to illustrate this point.
Despite their national appeal. They couldn't make significant inroads in Kashmir because, as Srinivasan argues, they failed to resonate with the specific concerns and aspirations of the Kashmiri people.
It's like they tried to apply
a one-size-fits-all approach.
A national template to a very unique and complex region.
Right. It's a reminder that a national narrative, while important, needs to be tailored to the specific context of each region.
Right.
And for that, you need strong local leaders who understand the ground realities and can connect with the people on their terms.
And Prime Point Srinivasan actually points to the example of Congress's overdependence on Bhupinder Singh Hooda in Haryana.
To make this same point.
Right.
He argues that by neglecting other communities and their leaders, the Congress lost touch with the ground reality.
And that ultimately cost them the election.
It's like they put all their eggs in one basket.
They did.
And hoped for the best.
But
in a diverse and complex country like India, you can't afford to ignore the aspirations of different communities and their leaders.
Absolutely not.
Right.
You have to build bridges.
Yeah.
You have to create a sense of inclusivity. And you have to empower local leaders to connect with their communities.
Now, what I love about Prime Point Srinivasan is that he doesn't just leave us with these lessons.
He does.
He takes it a step further by looking ahead to the upcoming elections in Maharashtra and Jharkhand he connects the dots between these recent assembly elections and what they could mean for upcoming political battles.
He's a master strategist.
Yeah.
He's always thinking several steps ahead.
So what does he see happening? Well, he says that the BJP's experience in managing diverse voter bases in Haryana could give them an edge in Maharashtra, a state where coalition politics and regional dynamics play a crucial role.
So their ability to build bridges.
Their ability to build bridges.
With different communities, which they demonstrated in Haryana, could prove to be a valuable asset.
It could.
In Maharashtra as well.
Absolutely.
On the other hand, Srinivasan sees potential.
He does.
For the Congress. In Maharashtra, drawing on their experience. In building alliances. In Jammu and Kashmir. He suggests that their collaboration with the NC could serve as a model for opposition parties looking to forge similar partnerships to challenge the BJP's dominance.
It's like he's saying, look, here's a blueprint for success. Learn from these examples.
And adapt your strategies accordingly.
And when it comes to Jharkhand, Srinivasan emphasizes the need for both the Congress and the BJP to rethink their approaches.
He does.
He particularly calls out the Congress, urging them to broaden their appeal and prioritize local issues. If they want to avoid a repeat of their Haryana debacle.
Well, like he's giving them a direct message. Don't underestimate the power of local concerns. You have to connect with people on the issues that matter most to them in their daily lives.
It's not just about grand narratives
and
national policies. It's about understanding.
It is about understanding.
The everyday struggles.
The everyday struggle.
And aspirations.
And the aspirations.
Of the people you're trying to represent.
Exactly.
And Prime Point Srinivasan, in his PreSense editorial, reminds us that the political landscape in India is constantly evolving.
It's a dynamic and ever-changing landscape. And you have to be nimble, you have to be adaptable, and you have to be willing to learn from your mistakes.
If you want to succeed.
If you want to stay ahead of the curve.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Prime Point Srinivasan's PreSense editorial, what are the big takeaways for our listeners?
Well, Prime Point Srinivasan has given us a lot to ponder. He's not just reporting on the Haryana and Jammu and Kashmir elections. He's offering a really deep analysis of the strategies at play and what they reveal about the changing dynamics of Indian politics,
Here's where it gets really interesting for me. Srinivasan seems to be saying that these regional elections are a microcosm of what's happening on the national stage,
I see that too.
The BJP's win in Haryana, with their focus on expanding beyond traditional vote banks, really speaks volumes, I think, about their evolving strategy. And on the flip side, the Congress's struggles in both Haryana and Jammu and Kashmir highlight the danger of complacency and failing to adapt to the changing aspirations of voters. Those are lessons any political party anywhere in the world can learn from.
Absolutely. Prime Point Srinivasan leaves us with his thought-provoking question. How might these trends influence the upcoming elections in Maharashtra and Jharkhand?
And even bigger, how do these results tell us about the evolving political landscape in India as a whole? How are national narratives interacting with regional identities? How are parties adapting to the demands of a diverse, increasingly informed electorate?
Big questions indeed. But Prime Point Srinivasan's analysis gives us a framework, I think, for understanding these complex dynamics. If you're interested in Indian politics, I highly recommend checking out his full editorial in the October issue of PreSense magazine. It's a masterclass in political strategy and offers a fascinating glimpse into the forces shaping the future of our vibrant democracy. So until next time, keep thinking, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.